Well, the federal election is in high gear, and so is the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our 2015 federal candidate interviews with those individuals seeking to be a member of Parliament for either Cambridge or the new federal riding of Kitchener South Hespeler. Today I'm sitting down with Nathan Lajeunesse, the Libertarian candidate for Kitchener South Hespeler. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you. How are
Great
you?
to meet you.
I'm happy to be here.
I know you're happy to be here. You were right out of the gate right away. You're the first one to respond, and you're the first interview that I've got. And it's certainly great to see. It's a brand new riding. It's going to be very interesting because you got a little bit of Cambridge and a little bit of Kitchener. Mm-hmm. Whereabouts are you from in the riding?
I was born and raised in Hespeler.
Oh, really?
Yep. I've lived there 27 out of 29 years of my life.
Oh, very good.
I did a short stint in Ayr, Ontario. Mm-hmm. Moved back to Hespeler last September.
Oh, good. So you're very familiar with the Cambridge element, as well as obviously you've been outside of Cambridge, I'm sure, and
yes,
and in Ayr, but also you're probably well aware of the Kitchener South area as well. I think most of us in Cambridge, we used to do a lot of our shopping up there before we got a mall. But,
yep.
Well, that's good. The Libertarian Agenda and platform is really interesting to me, and I'll tell you why. A number of years ago, few years ago, on Facebook, we always have these little surveys. You can test your eyesight, or you can test your knowledge, or whatever, and they're just little games that are on. Well, what was interesting was one day it says, here's one to see where you sit politically. So normally I don't play those games, but I thought, well, this one might be interesting for me to play.
Yeah.
So I jumped in and I went in and I filled out all the questions and answered all the questions, 10 or 12 questions or whatever. And then it comes out at the end and it kind of tells you where you sit. I sat right in the Libertarian area.
I think most would.
Well, and you know what really shocked me, Nathan, was all of the responses that I saw. About 90% of the people that filled that out sat in the quadrant of Libertarian. Why do you think that is?
People want individual rights. People don't want to be strangled with taxation, and not everyone has the same ideas as the rest of the country.
That's interesting, and I think, it's interesting. I spent some time over the last few days because I knew you were coming in, and your counterpart for Cambridge will likely come in as well. But I had an opportunity to really look at the platform and try and understand it from my perspective. And, there were a lot of elements, I think the vast majority of people. For instance, you talk about the tax rate, maximum tax rate of 15% across the board, and increasing the exemption amount from $11,000, which it currently is now, up to $17,300. So in essence, what you're really saying is anybody in the poverty line is not going to pay any tax.
Correct.
And the multimillionaire, he's only going to get a $17,000 reduction, and then he's going to pay 15% on whatever he earned.
Correct.
I think, most people would look at that and say, well, that makes it simple, right? It's understandable. There's not a whole bunch of areas where you can hide your money, and it seems right.
More people might be able to file their own taxes too.
Well, yeah, exactly. Now, your accountant friends probably won't like that.
Yes.
But so the economy is going to be number one in this. There's no question about it. We're all sensing that. We've launched a program, and I think you really liked it too. We talked about it a little bit before we went on air. Small business is too big to ignore. 98.2% of all the businesses in Canada, employer businesses in Canada, are small businesses, and that's defined as any company or any employer business with 99 or fewer employees. They also employ 2/3 of the population of employed workers in Canada. And they create 80% of all the new jobs created are from small business. This is a sector of our economy that has been ignored, and it's too big to be ignored.
Yep.
What's your feeling on that?
I think small business is greatly undervalued. I think that if you lower restrictions put on business owners and people with great ideas, you're going to get more people with great ideas able to actually achieve them. Mm-hmm. I think the government needs to back out of everyone's pocket, leave people alone and let Canadians do what they do best.
Mm-hmm.
Create, innovate, and improve. It's that simple. If someone can start a business in a smaller community right away, and if he actually excels at it, he should be most likely leaping into the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
How much more simpler can you boost up the middle
Yeah,
class?
I think, I think if we value big businesses,
Mhm.
which we all do, because
Oh, yeah.
they, little businesses, small businesses supply those big businesses. But if we value those big businesses, what we should be trying to do is making every effort to get our small businesses big.
Yes.
And, largely, I think from the Chamber's perspective, we see that that's ignored. If you go to federal, even the grants and loans that are offered to businesses, really, small businesses don't even fit into the category.
No.
One I was looking at for a company in town that was interested, they had to have a minimum of a $10 million project. Well, not very many small businesses are going to have a $10 million project. That's pretty much a medium-sized or big business type of project. And they just didn't seem to fit. And yet big businesses are getting these grants and are involved with these programs all the time. And I guess if you're in favor of that, that's great. I know the Libertarian Party says no more corporate welfare, get right out of that. However, if you are into it, it should extend right down to the sector that's creating most of the new jobs.
Yes.
Which is a small business sector. And I think, that those large corporations can certainly self-finance a tremendous amount of things, so.
Yes. The part that irks me the most about those is many of those big corporations accept money from the Canadian government, get all the new equipment, and then they pack it up and ship it to another country and open up there while they got all that equipment for almost free. It happened right in Kitchener with Michelin.
That's right, and that's interesting because the Libertarian Party's got a really fascinating position on international trade.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the government of the day and past governments doing such a great thing of creating NAFTA, creating the CETA agreement, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement with the European Union, the South Korean agreement that was just signed, the Asian Pacific agreement that we're talking about. What's the Libertarian Party say about trade barriers?
Get rid of them. Open free market. Let Canadians actually compete with the rest of the world Now, if countries are using victims, there has to be.
Yeah.
But if it's an open free market and tariffs, make importing much cheaper and let Canadians actually be able to compete on a fair level playing ground.
So we don't need all these agreements signed and cross the T's and dot the I's and say, well, we'll charge a little bit of a tariff on this because that, no.
No.
Eliminate tariffs, that's it. You can bring your goods in here with no tariffs, but you got to allow us to get our goods there with no tariffs as well.
Correct.
So what's good for the goose is good for the gander as well.
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting. Those would be interesting international discussions. I don't know how they would play out in other parts of the world, but I know in my travels and speaking to other countries, there is no question about it. They want products and services from Canada.
Oh, yes.
They're dying to get them. They'll do almost anything to get them.
Canadians have the quality and the resources.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I thought that was a fascinating. I don't know how it would work, Nathan. Maybe if you get there and you formed a libertarian government, we'd see how it works. But it's a very interesting concept. Jobs are really critical as well, and we talk about that all the time. And I think most of the leaders are talking about how to create jobs. We know that 80% of all new job creation comes from small business. So it really shouldn't be. There shouldn't be anything, mystical about this. Prop up your small businesses and you'll have new job creation. However, part of the challenge a small business has that I run into every single day is talent. They can't get the right skilled workers. I had a member of ours who needed a skilled welder, but not just a regular welder. This was a welder that could weld odd steels and stainless steel in particular. And generally that's considered a red seal trade, which is largely not just from licensing, but experience as well.
Yes.
So you need years and years of experience at doing it before you really, that's the red seal component of it. Well, it's virtually impossible. It's virtually impossible to get a welder. I had another guy with a trucking company. He was ready to hire 140 truck drivers tomorrow. Can't get them.
Mm-hmm.
He would hire European truck drivers in a heartbeat because they're used to driving down narrow roads and fast speeding highways. He'd love to have European truck drivers, but he can't bring them in. What's the Libertarian Party say about trained foreign worker program or immigrant workers coming to Canada?
If immigrants have actual skills and they can bring talent to the country, let them in. But the temporary foreign worker program, that there's no need for it. There are people with no skills, and there are people here that are unemployed that can complete those tasks.
Mm-hmm.
But if an employer needs a certain skill and it cannot actually be met by a Canadian, and that part needs to be determined, then there is no reason why immigrants can't come over, and we should accept their education and we should accept their actual training. That's the way. When you're in the when you're in the industrial sector, all these maintenance guys are older European immigrants, and they helped boost this economy.
Yeah, no question about it. I think the Industrial Revolution will point to if we didn't have the help of skilled European workers,
Tradesmen, yes.
we wouldn't have built the economy that we have today. So I think it's critically important. You know, I know the Trained Foreign Worker program. You know, it kind of offered something. I really do prefer the Libertarian program where it talks about, you know, work permits and visas
Mm-hmm.
and monitoring individuals. You know, it's really interesting. When a couple of years ago I was in Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and you know, quite a bit different. Obviously, we're looking at a kingdom as opposed to a democratic government here. But they have a policy on immigrants. They can never become citizens of the country, which is maybe wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
but if they're out of work for 2 or 3 weeks, they get sent back.
Yes.
That's just the way it is. So if they're not being productive to society, and I think, you know, there's no reason why we can't have a program like that where a trained foreign worker comes in from any other country, is either sponsored by a family or sponsored by an organization that says, you know, we'll take care of these folks if they're out of work or whatever. We'll try and help them find a job. I think it's critically important we do something like that without, I don't think we should open up the floodgates and say,
No.
you know, come on in, but
But-
I think we need to rely on those organizations like businesses who need the skilled workers, who have been advertising for months and can't seem to get anybody that fits the mold. They need to be able to have the access to the rest of the world too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's the biggest thing that I have with that is there's a difference between a skilled foreign worker and there's a difference between an unskilled foreign worker.
Mm-hmm.
And with the unskilled, we have a big problem with that in Canada.
Yeah.
Because there are many unemployed here that can go to work.
Yep, for sure. No question about it. Another thing that not all the federal leaders, 2 of the federal leaders are talking about is carbon taxation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have to do something about global warming. Our environment is critically important. We could probably have a fun debate about that as well and what our net effect is in the global marketplace with respects to carbon emissions. But suffice it to say that's on everyone's agenda. The NDP government and the Liberal government have both talked about a carbon tax. The Ontario government's talking about, you know, carbon credits, which is same thing.
Yes.
So what's the Libertarian position on carbon taxation?
Now, the big thing about libertarians is there shouldn't be any victimless offenses. When you're affecting the environment, there's a victim. There's all of us, and there's all the animals and everything. So there has to be something done. But it might be more left up to the municipalities and to the actual provinces. Every single province is different. The federal government should not be wasting everyone's funding trying to research and come up with what the right idea is for British Columbia, Newfoundland, and every single province, when the provinces can maybe and should be able to decide for themselves.
Well, I guess from your perspective, you're saying that the provinces or territories are responsible for their own, what's
Yes.
going on in their own territory. They're probably more aware of it than what the federal government is, so.
And I would imagine that the federal government costs a lot more to investigate something than the provincial government does.
Yeah. Where do these tax dollars go? if they were to, I guess to some degree, I wouldn't have a problem with the gas tax if I knew that the gas tax was only going to road infrastructure. Maybe I wouldn't have a problem with the carbon tax if I knew that the carbon tax revenue was going to make it a better environment for future generations and reduce CO2 emissions. But fact of the matter is, in Canada, these go into general revenue.
And no one knows where they go. You'll notice when certain bailouts happen and stuff like that, they pick and choose little chunks from all these different revenues. And like even for the Conservatives' balanced budget, the contingency fund, which is supposed to be for a rainy day, just got milked to help balance the budget.
Yeah. Speaking of balanced budgets, what's the Libertarian Party think about debt and deficit and balancing budgets and all that stuff?
If we greatly reduce our expenses and you actually spend less than you create, you're going to balance the budget. You're going to slowly knock down. The debt has to be paid off. I like a quote by George Washington, and it goes along something with, no generation should be allowed to contract debts that it cannot be repaid in its own lifetime. If you take on debt, that's stealing from tomorrow. That's what debt is in the most simple form. And if you're actually going to spend more than we can actually pay back and just let our children deal with it, to me, that's not very Canadian. And I know my grandparents didn't get raised that way, and I know that's not how I want my daughter to have to pay for something I've enjoyed today.
Yeah, and I think that, it might sound, a little bit, wishing well, but I think, the fact of the matter is we've gone through a number of decades where, government really has relied on the revenues of future generations.
Yes. That's scary.
And yeah, because you don't know what the revenue is going to be like. If pre the Great Depression, if governments had have relied on the revenue from that era, they'd have seen mounting debts because it just wouldn't have been able to be paid off. So.
Yeah, the Canadian government has somehow thought that hard work, savings, and thrift are no longer virtues, and I think that's got to change.
Speaking of savings and thrift, and I know this isn't a federal issue, but I do know you have an opinion on it. The provincial government in Ontario is talking about putting in an Ontario retirement pension plan. The federal government gave them permission with pooled pension plans to go ahead, and I think Quebec actually implemented a pooled pension program at a provincial level. Pooled pension programs are a little bit different than what the ORPP is talking about. ORPP is going to be modeled after the CPP, meaning that it's a government-regulated, government-controlled program. It might be at arm's length from government, but all of the regulations and all the concerns are going to be addressed by the government. It's a defined benefit program as well as a defined contribution program where most organizations, big organizations, GM, Ford, Toyota, a number of them, have defined contribution programs. The defined benefit comes from, or the benefit comes from, they have professionals that watch their fund and make sure that it's properly invested. But there can be ups and there can be downs. There's no question about it. Where a defined benefit is saying, here's what you're going to get at the end, whether you like that or whether you don't like
Which
that.
actually changes.
Which actually changes, yes, over time. However, the real problem that I think I have with that, forgetting about the issue that I don't think we need it, is that if someone predeceases their retirement, that the money that they've put in is lost. It's not unlike the CPP.
Yes.
You get $2,500, and yet you could have been contributing for 40 some odd years. So these programs really, I think, to some degree, don't provide a good vehicle. What the government is saying is people aren't saving, and particularly in your age category, people aren't saving enough for their retirement. However, at the same time, governments are taking over 40% of our income in taxes. More than what the average person spends on a roof over their head and food in their belly. Maybe if they gave back some of those taxes, we'd have some room to save. Or you would have some room to save.
And if you didn't think there was anyone else saving for you, you'd have a lot more pressure to save.
Well, that's the other thing too. I think dependency on somebody taking care of me at the end of the day is you know, people don't worry about it too much. But the fact of the matter is, though, Nathan, is we're living in an era where the wealthiest retirees ever in history are retiring right now.
Yes.
You know, the vast majority of people that are retiring on great savings or great pensions that they've had.
Mm-hmm.
We have public sector people that are retiring at 55 on fantastic pensions. So what would the Libertarian government of Canada do with respects to these provincial jurisdictions coming up and adding, or would you enhance the CPP? What would the Libertarian federal government do?
Give the money back to the people. The ORPP is going to be just as crippling as the CPP, if not worse. I'm not quite sure how they expect entrepreneurs to actually pay an extra amount of money after they've already raised the minimum wage, and people are not going to receive the money. That's the scariest part about it. Is I've read somewhere that the original contributors to CPP, when they retired, they got 17 times more than they contributed.
Yeah.
People today that are accepting CPP checks, the amount, I don't even know what the number would be about how much you contributed to what you're getting back. It's pure theft. The government's using these programs to create spots where when they get into tough situations, that's where they take the money from every single time. The ORPP is like 1.9% extra that the employer has to pay. I'm not exactly sure how you expect a mom and pop opening up a restaurant to pay their dishwashers $11 an hour plus another 1.9% ORPP plus the WSIB and all the other rigmarole that this government provides for them. It's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to live in a country where all you can eat at is Boston pizza and Montana's, that's it. No other actual whatever your community wants.
Yeah.
That's the scary part.
And I think, you know, that's the foundation of our program, Small Business is Too Big to Ignore. It doesn't, you know, these larger, big box stores, for that matter, they're great to have, and we love to have them for variety. But, you know, the heart and soul of our community is the small businesses in our community. You deal with them every single day. I deal with them every day.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody out there deals with them every single day. In fact, the vast majority of everybody watching this works for a small business. Small businesses are a key component. I think we think government at all levels has largely ignored them because they come and go, and they're small operations. They got 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 25 employees. What's the big deal? But collectively, they're way too big to ignore. So we hope the Libertarian Party will stand behind small business as well, and you as well, Nathan.
Yes, I hope so too.
Any final words or comments that you want to make to the constituents of Kitchener South Hespeler?
I'm Nathan Lajeunesse, the candidate for the Libertarian Party of Canada in Kitchener South Hespeler. If you no longer think that the big three have your best interests in mind and you want your own money to make your own decisions for your family, vote for me.
Well, there you go, folks. The Libertarian Party, Kitchener South Hespeler candidate, Nathan Lajeunesse. Thanks very much, Nathan. It was great to meet you, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you very much.